Something we've heard a lot of over the past few years is how animation doesn't get enough respect. It's still treated as a genre for whittle babies and not an art form. I mean, we all remember that embarrassing moment from last year's Oscars.
So many kids watch these movies over and over and over and over and over and over and over.
Here are the nominees for Best Animated Feature Film.
But personally, I feel like animation has never been as respected and innovative as it is today. Let me explain. If I ran up to someone on the street, yelled in their face, no, screamed in their face, "What is your favourite animation?" my guess is that 99% would come up with one of three titles. Projects so golden, so expressive and innovative with their animation that pretty much everyone who watched them agrees they're masterpieces. And these three are none other than Into the Spider-Verse, Arcane, and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Probably more likely one of these two, but I had to include Arcane in the golden trio. So what do these three have in common? Well, they all use a pretty similar animation style, playing around with the frame rate to help emphasize certain actions, you know, add a little bit more pack to that punch. And this is especially effective during action scenes, where it's all fast paced with lots of cuts, and so slowing down the frame rate allows you to absorb what's happening on screen much easier. But even though these projects are similar with their styles, each one is executed differently in order to help fit with the themes of the story being told. And these differences are what stop these projects from being just copies, instead proving that they're worthy of being held up as unique masterpieces in their own right. This style is quickly becoming the new norm of animation, and honestly, I'm so happy about this. But it's important that studios realise when it needs to be adapted and changed to fit the story being told. There needs to be some benefit from it being animated this way. And this is actually why, and please try and hear me out with this one, I know it's a good movie overall, but I'm not the biggest fan of Entergalactic by the one and only Kid Cudi, despite him being in my top 6 artists of all time. Got a little man on the moon drawing right there. In case you haven't seen it, it's a romance drama, a pretty grounded story. So most of the time, the characters are sitting around talking, or doing just everyday things. So when they use this very low frame rate throughout the entire movie, I just didn't really see a purpose to it. Spider-Verse and Puss in Boots are action adventures, so the characters are almost always moving, and so that slowed frame rate makes sense. And even then, they don't use it all the time. But in Entergalactic, it's kind of frustrating to watch at times because it looks like it's lagging.
I get that. I'm just looking for the host.
But like I said, pretty good movie overall. I don't think it'd be controversial to say that Spider-Verse likely inspired this movie, and also many others which will be coming out over the coming years. It's the gold standard for a lot of these new low frame rate 2.5D animations. So let's talk quickly about why the visuals of Spider-Verse work so well.
Okay, let's do this one last time, yeah?
Spider-Verse's style incorporates the tropes of comic books. You got the thought bubbles popping up, a bit of the boom pow wham, as well as those little dots used for shading. The roots of the character are there upon screen in every single frame. It is undeniably a comic book movie, more so than any other in my opinion. Definitely more than any live action movie just by the nature of animation being closer to comics than real life. And probably my favourite thing about this movie is its use of colour in the storytelling. There is a lot of characters in this movie, but they're all so memorable, partly because each spider person comes from a different dimension, and so has a different colour palette and even art style at times to help make them feel unique. And so at the end of this movie, when all these universes are colliding, it's this chaotic blend of all these different colours coming together. So that heavy use of colour all throughout the film isn't just to look pretty, it's to make this moment more impactful and help you understand the scope of how many worlds are colliding. And this movie winning an Oscar was just a small sign of the impact it would go on to have. I'm actually kind of shocked at the box office numbers for this. Don't get me wrong, 600 million is a lot of money. I could really do with 600 million right now, so subscribe. But for a film that feels like everyone has seen or at least heard of, It's not as much as I thought, so I'm assuming the word of mouth really helped this one long after it stopped playing in theatres. Now, because the second of our golden trio, Arcane, came out 3 years after Spider-Verse in 2021, it'd be easy to think it took a lot of inspiration from Spidey Boy, but both projects actually began production around the same time. It's just Arcane took so much longer to make because, well, there's so much more of it. And they actually are quite different. So Arcane was also a big success, this time for Netflix. And quickly, if you're unaware, Arcane is a 9-part series which takes on a sort of steampunk style, with magic and sci-fi elements mixed in. So rather than the comic book ink style with lines and dots for shading, there's a lot of juicy, thick brushstrokes. The screen looks covered in oil and grease, which is how I like my women. Don't get me wrong, there is still colour, but it's often muted, as though a cloud of smoke and fumes are in the air, and this works well with the steampunk vibe. It feels like there's machinery chugging away just off frame in most scenes, but what about a movie which did have a good reference on how to get this right from the moment it was written up? Well, let's go on to the third piece that helped to pioneer this new gold standard of modern animation, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Also known as Death Wolf featuring Lil Puss, because even if you haven't seen this movie, you've likely heard about how badass the wolf is, despite having very little screen time. I wonder how long till he gets his own spin-off too. I'm betting on it. This movie was probably the biggest surprise of 2023. No one expected it to be as amazing as it is. And that's partly because the first one sort of just came and went, receiving mixed reviews. It didn't have nearly as much impact as any of the Shrek films. I don't think anyone even really knew that this movie was coming out, let alone had it as their most anticipated movie of 2023. So I actually watched the first Puss in Boots a few days ago, and it's okay. It's just okay. Actually no, I'll go as far as to say it was decent. It's fairly predictable at times and plays out mostly how you expect it to, but there is moments of fun and charm mixed in there. But the character design is just a bit off.
Don't flirt with him.
I'm not going to.
Don't copyright me. Let's take a comparison of the characters Humpty Dumpty from the first film and Jack Horner from The Last Wish. They're both villains with fairly odd body shapes, beautiful in their own way, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to body shame anyone, but come on, look at this Eggman. He falls right into the uncanny valley, where his face is so human, but everything around it is just so off. Eggshells are hard, and us humans are soft. Well, I'm not, but I mean our faces. Our skin stretches and moves as we talk. So to see this face transplanted onto a rigid shell just doesn't look right. Where does his face end and the shell begin? These are the kind of questions you'll be asked in Philosophy 101. But Jack Horner doesn't really have this effect. Probably because he's human and we understand how human bodies work. He may be a bit abnormal, but he's not inconceivable. Also, the voice actor, John Mulaney, really helps to sell this character.
A deadly fairy? Put a spell on the forest then!
As his voice is so animated and cartoony, it fits the look. Whereas the voice actor for Humpty Dumpty is just sort of a normal guy.
Spent a lot of time in a prison preparing for this.
You set me
Oh
up.
yeah, I set you up, of course.
Also, it helps that Jack Horner is the villain from the get-go, whereas Humpty Dumpty creeps me out and we're supposed to think he's a good guy for most of the movie. But as soon as I saw this Eggman, there was no doubt in my mind that he was the baddie, and I ain't never been with a baddie. I mean, Puss trusts him, but we never do, so his betrayal holds almost no weight. And the movie does look good, but they went for this more realistic look with natural colours and lighting. But this is a fairy tale. It should be bright and colourful. It should feel like a fantasy. Go over the top, just like the characters who inhabit this world, which is exactly the tone that Last Wish went for. I mean, look at these gorgeous environments. There's so many colours I can't even count them, and I'm so glad that for the second movie they realised it had been long enough to where they could just reinvent themselves. I mean, this is part of the Shrek universe, and no film before has had this style, so there's a chance it might have been jarring, but they took a risk and it paid off. Now, I want to talk quickly about a not-so-modern animation that has gone on to become a sort of cult classic, the one and only MassiveHeadMind, now in 3D. I truly believe that if this movie came out today, it would be a smash hit. I mean, look at this guy. Look at the...
Nice memes, good memeage, and so on.
And as nuts as it is, that is a big part of selling a movie now. I mean, just look at Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Yes, the main reason it's been a success is how amazing it is, but I'm willing to bet that it's also partly because of the number of goofy tee-hee memes. That little wolf whistle where Puss's hair stands on end. Everyone has seen this, and it's free advertising. Thousands and thousands of comments under Instagram posts saying, movie? Name of movie? And obviously there's no way to predict what's gonna get big on the internet, something which brands like BBC and Netflix don't seem to understand. But I've noticed that films and shows which tend to get this effect have moments and characters who are very expressive. And animation is as expressive an art form as you can get, not being bound by what real human characters can do. And this was released in 2011, just as the superhero movie era was about to come in, a year before the Avengers would pass 2 billion at the box office. So a superhero parody by DreamWorks with Will Ferrell. I really do believe that Megamind is the right film at the wrong time. But don't get me wrong, there is still some bad stuff happening with modern animation. I want to talk more about that Oscars animation speech because I think it highlights a lot of problems with not just the Oscars, but the industry as a whole. And by the way, keep in mind they were reading from a teleprompter, so this probably isn't even their opinions. But in this speech, they brought up 3 actresses who are now live-action Disney princesses, and I'll just play it.
So many kids watch these movies over and over and over and over and over and over and over.
I see some parents out there know exactly what we're talking about. Here are the nominees for Best Animated Feature Film.
So the way this comes across is animated movies are just stuff to stick on to distract your kid. And I think the reason there is this feeling that animation doesn't get enough respect is because when you say the word animation, most people's minds probably go straight to Disney. It's the big boy in the room, with the most classics and name recognition under its belt, and still is, in a way, the face of animation. But now, they've lost a lot of respect, and rightfully so. At this point, they're completely coasting off their glory days with these remakes, and it'd be fine if they were also focused on producing good animation too. But rather than looking towards the future and giving out sequels to their most recent popular animated franchises like Zootopia, Big Hero 6 and Moana, instead they brush them off to Disney Plus to become series which have far less care given to them because they're not in the spotlight, or they're being remade into live action just 7 years since the original, like Moana. And so when what many see as the face of animation is beginning to lose a lot of respect, it's no wonder some of this attitude bleeds over to the art form as a whole. But this is just one studio, a studio where it seems that animation is becoming lower and lower on their priority list as they go around collecting IPs like their trading cards. And as they continue to expand and become known for different areas, Marvel, Star Wars, live action remakes, this means that when people think of the word animation, there's a possibility that Disney won't be the first thing that people think of. Which brings us back to the beginning of this video. It's still treated as a genre for whittle babies and not an art form. Do. And yes, some people are always gonna think this, but I really do think that it's becoming a smaller and smaller small-minded community. I mean, just look at the growth of anime worldwide over the past decade. It's just continuing to get bigger and bigger. Before, it was mainly just Studio Ghibli, but now, every few months, there seems to be a new anime show which people are raving over. But even aside from the respect side of things, I feel like animation creators are being allowed to express themselves now more than ever, with a massive surge in animation for all ages. Love, Death and Robots would never have come out even 10 years ago, I don't think. Even aside from the R rating and massive amount of nudity and violence, yum, the concept alone is very experimental, with each episode of being from a different animation studio, having a different animation style and even runtime. When it was first released, all the episodes appeared in a different order for different users, which is unheard of and a really cool idea that is only available because of streaming. And part of what I think paved the way for more adult and experimental animation is actually YouTube, because it's accessible to everyone, everywhere, for free. It used to be, even if you are an independent creator, you still needed to find a distributor, and your creation is going to have to pass through so many heads and screen tests before it's released to the public. But now, independent shows can reach the world from their creators' bedrooms. Like The Big Les Show, something which started out as a joke between two friends, went on to become this introspective, spiritual, varied world full of colourful, hilarious characters. And the creator, Jared Wright, still animates all of it. That's as independent as it gets. And the whole web series is done on Microsoft Paint, which isn't even really a thing anymore. Well, not how it used to be. Just one guy, his mates, and not a gram of studio interference. Straight from the mind to the canvas. And I can't make this video without mentioning Adult Swim, and more specifically, Smiling Friends. The creators also started off on YouTube before coming together to make this masterpiece. This show is the definition of trusting your audience. It's so untraditional in almost every aspect. Adult cartoons are 20 minutes. That's just how it is, how it's always been. But if you stop and think for a second, this shouldn't have to be the norm, especially with the rise in streaming, meaning that shows don't have to work around ad breaks anymore. And it's the same with the episode count. If you're struggling to come up with episode ideas, then maybe scale it back a bit. And so with Smiling Friends, episodes are 10 minutes long and there's only 9 of them, 8 in the first season and 1 special. So the whole thing is like 90 minutes long. You can sit down and watch it in one go, and yet it's so memorable.
Man, I don't know what to think no more, man.
Okay, what's the escort? That was messing with your head.
Get out of here.
Animation is expensive, and so I'll gladly take half the runtime if the quality is doubled. And they're not just loose with the runtime, but the style of animation. It blends almost every single kind there is, so you never know what to expect. I've actually already got a video on Smiling Friends if you want to check that out, and I'm working on a ranking, so subscribe and stay tuned for that. Animation has always been at the forefront of creativity and pushing itself as an art form, and these properties I've talked about today are what make me really believe it's a great time to be a fan of animation, just maybe not a fan of Disney. Anyways, thanks for watching this video, I really appreciate it if you made it to the end. If you like any of these drawings behind me, my Instagram is waterwavy with 4 whole Ys. Can you believe it? Can you believe they let me have that many Ys? Thank you, I love you, goodbye.